Welcome to Tell Me More Stories Told as Podcast. Okay, prepare yourself because the story we're diving into today, it's one of those that sounds completely made up. Seriously, stranger than fiction.
Absolutely. We're talking about Natalia Grace. Maybe you've heard the name. Ukrainian-born, adopted by an American family, and then, well, things got incredibly complicated and bizarre.
Yeah, bizarre is putting it mildly. We've got news articles, timelines, all sorts of details about this really unique legal saga, personal drama. It's a lot.
It really is. So our mission today is to try and unpack it all. Look at the key moments, the conflicting claims.
And try to figure out what's at the heart of this. What's the truth about Natalia's age, about the accusations? Let's dig in.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Natalia Grace was born in Ukraine, September 4th, 2003, in Mykolaiv. Her birth mother was Anna Volodymyrivna Gava.
And life started tough for her, right? She ended up in an orphanage.
Yeah, and she was diagnosed pretty early on with something called spondyloepiphyseal dysplasia congenita. It's a rare form of dwarfism, affects bone growth significantly.
So, she has this condition, she's in an orphanage. Then comes adoption. First time, 2008.
Right. Diane and Gary Saccone, New Hampshire, adopted her. Seemed like a fresh start.
But it wasn't straightforward. Just 2 years later, 2010, the Saccones placed her for adoption again.
They cited disruptive behavior. We don't have a ton of detail on what exactly that entailed back then, but clearly something wasn't working out.
It definitely makes you pause. So soon after adopting.
It does. And that leads us to the next chapter. Spring 2010, Kristine and Michael Barnett step in. They adopt Natalia. Her legal name becomes Natalia Grace Barnett.
Okay, so now she's with the Barnetts. You'd hope this would be stability, but no.
Not at all. Because just a year later, 2011, things take a really sharp turn. The Barnetts start making claims that Natalia isn't a child.
Like not a child at all.
Exactly. They claim she's an adult pretending to be a child, and then they allegedly abandoned her around this time.
Wow. Abandon her after claiming she's an adult. This is already confusing.
It's incredibly confusing. And they didn't just say it, they took legal action. In 2012, they went to court to try and legally change her birth year.
Change it from 2003 to what?
To 1989.
1989. That would make her 22. When they adopted her thinking she was, what, 6 or 7?
Precisely. It's an extraordinary claim and an even more extraordinary legal move. It really shows how determined they were about this narrative they'd formed.
But hold on, you mentioned earlier that her birth year was 2003. What happened with that court thing?
Well, that's where it gets even stranger. They succeeded initially in getting the court to change it to 1989.
Wait, a court actually did that based on the parents' word?
It seems so, at least in that initial ruling. It's one of the most, frankly, unbelievable parts of this whole story. How does that even happen?
I have no idea. But then, reality check.
Kind of. Fast forward quite a bit to August 2023. A DNA test was done. And get this, it estimated Natalia to be around 22 years old then, in 2023.
Okay, wait. If she was 22 in 2023, do the math. That means back in 2011, when the Barnetts claimed she was an adult.
She would have been about 8. May 9. Right in line with her original birth certificate.
So the DNA backs up the original story, completely contradicts the Barnetts' claim and that initial court change.
Exactly. And eventually, the legal system did correct itself. Her birth year was legally restored back to 2005.
Okay, thank goodness for that. But the damage, the confusion.
Immense. And that whole period where she was legally considered an adult based on the 1989 birth year, that has huge implications for what happened next.
Right, because the abandonment claims happened around then, so 2013.
July 2013, the Barnetts moved Natalia into an apartment in Lafayette, Indiana.
By herself?
An apartment. Alone. Even if you believe she was legally 22 or 23 by then, given her disability, leaving her alone.
It seems incredibly neglectful. And shortly after setting her up in that apartment, the Barnetts moved.
Moved where?
To Canada, with their biological children. Leaving Natalia behind in Indiana.
Wow. Just left her. That's the allegation, yes. But thankfully, she wasn't alone for too long. Pretty quickly, another couple, Antoine and Cynthia Mans, became aware of her situation.
The Manses.
Yes. They took Natalia into their home, and they immediately noticed she was really struggling, like clearly not capable of living independently.
Which makes sense if she was actually, what, 10 years old at the time?
Exactly. It lines up with the 2003 birth date, not the court-ordered 1989 one.
So what happened to the Barnetts legally? Surely leaving a dependent child or even a dependent adult alone like that has consequences.
They did face charges, felony neglect charges, but the legal outcomes were interesting. Michael Barnett went to trial in 2022 and was acquitted.
Acquitted? How?
The details of the trial strategy are complex, but essentially, his defense likely focused on the existing court order, stating Natalia was an adult, potentially arguing they couldn't neglect someone legally considered an adult, or focusing on the dependency aspect related to her disability rather than age.
And Kristine Barnett.
The charges against her were dismissed in March 2023. So ultimately, neither faced conviction for neglect.
That's surprising, given the circumstances.
It is. But here's another fascinating piece that came out during the legal process. The prosecution, trying to build their neglect case, actually tracked down Natalia's birth mother.
Anna Gava, back in Ukraine.
Yes. And they did DNA testing.
Mm-hmm.
Confirmed. Absolutely. Anna Gava is Natalia's biological mother.
Okay.
Now remember that court-ordered 1989 birth year for Natalia.
Yeah.
Anna Gava, the confirmed biological mother, was born in April 1979.
Wait a minute. If Natalia was born in 1989 and her mother was born in 1979?
Her mother would have been 10 years old.
10! When she supposedly gave birth. That's biologically impossible.
Precisely. It's incredibly strong evidence supporting the original 2003 birth date. To basic biology.
That piece of information alone seems like it should have settled the age debate right there.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
The prosecution also found Ukrainian birth records, hospital records, all supporting the 2003 date.
So they had all this evidence.
But, in another twist, a lot of this evidence about her age, including the birth mother information and Ukrainian records, was actually barred from being presented at the neglect trial.
Barred? Why?
The court ruled that the trial should focus specifically on whether Natalia was dependent on the Barnetts due to her physical disability, regardless of her age. The legal age, at that point for the trial's purposes, might have still been considered the court-ordered 1989, or perhaps the focus was shifted away from age altogether. It meant the core issue of her true age wasn't fully litigated in that specific trial.
That seems like a crucial piece to leave out. It feels like the whole case hinges on her age.
It really does. And it adds another layer of complexity to why the neglect charges didn't stick.
Okay, this story is just layer upon layer. What about this orphan movie connection? I've heard about that.
Right. So Cynthia Manns, the woman who took Natalia in after the Barnetts left, she had a strong suspicion. She believed Kristine Barnett got the idea to change Natalia's age from the 2009 horror movie Orphan.
I know that movie. The adopted kid turns out to be a violent adult woman with dwarfism, right?
Exactly. It's a pretty disturbing plot. And Cynthia Manns thought Kristine saw parallels, or worse, got inspired.
And did the Barnetts ever mention the movie? Or act like they believed that narrative?
According to reports and their own statements later, yes. They claimed Natalia lied about her age, that she exhibited really disturbing sociopathic behaviors. They painted a picture very similar to the character in the movie threatening them, acting inappropriately.
So they leaned into that narrative, that she was this deceptive, dangerous adult.
That was definitely the story they put forward. It explained, in their view, why they felt they had to separate from her and change her age legally.
But what did the Manses say? The people who lived with her right after the Barnetts, did they see this supposed sociopathic behavior?
Completely the opposite. Ann Pawn and Cynthia Manns stated very clearly that Natalia showed none of that behavior while living with them. They saw a struggling young person who needed care, not a manipulative adult.
So you have these two completely opposing views of the same person from people who lived with her consecutively.
Exactly. It's one of the central mysteries. Were the Barnetts exaggerating or misinterpreting things? Or did Natalia behave differently in different environments? Or was one side simply not telling the truth? It's incredibly hard to know for sure.
Okay, if you're finding this deep dive into Natalia Grace's story as just unbelievable and fascinating as we are, definitely hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss other deep dives we do here on Tell Me More.
Absolutely. So Natalia's time with the Manses wasn't the end of her journey either.
No. Where did she go after that?
She eventually moved in with the DePaul family.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of history there. The DePauls had actually tried to adopt Natalia before the Barnetts did.
Oh, wow. So they had a prior connection.
Yes. It seems they maintained some level of concern or contact.
And was that situation stable? Please tell me something stable happened.
Well, more complications arose. There were later allegations, pretty serious ones, that the Manns family had actually been extorting money from Natalia during the time she lived with them.
Extorting money from Natalia.
That was the claim. The DePauls reportedly stepped in again, helping Natalia get legal help to try and recover funds she believed were wrongfully taken by the Manses.
Good grief. This poor young woman just seemed to go from one difficult, potentially exploitative situation to another.
It really seems that way. Her vulnerability, combined with the confusion surrounding her identity and age, appears to have put her in some very precarious positions.
Unsurprisingly, this whole saga caught the media's attention, didn't it?
Massively. It's such a sensational story. Natalia herself appeared on the Dr. Phil show back in 2019 to try and tell her side of things.
I can only imagine how intense that must have been, being thrust into the spotlight like that after everything.
Definitely. And the interest hasn't died down. There's the investigation discovery docuseries, The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. It started as that, now it's The Curious Case of Natalia Grace. Natalia Speaks.
So she's actively participating in telling her story now.
It seems so. They even had a third season premiere in January 2025. The public remains fascinated, and new information or perspectives keep emerging.
And didn't Hulu make a show, too?
Yeah, a dramatized series based on her story called Good American Family, with Imogen Faith Reed playing Natalia. When your life becomes a docuseries and a scripted drama, you know it's been extraordinary.
Extraordinary and likely incredibly traumatic. When you step back and look at the whole thing, that initial court decision to change her birth year.
It really stands out, doesn't it? The sheer improbability of it. A court legally altering a child's fundamental identity based on the adoptive parent's claims that were later contradicted by significant evidence. It highlights just how unique and frankly bizarre this case truly is.
It makes you question everything about how these systems are supposed to work.
It really does. So wrapping this up, the story of Natalia Grace is just a maze. Conflicting accounts, legal battles that seem almost impossible, deeply personal accusations flying back and forth.
We've walked through the adoptions, the shocking fight over her age, the abandonment claims, the different families, the media frenzy.
And what really sticks with you is the ambiguity. So much is still unclear. What was Natalia's precise age and level of maturity during those key years? What were the Barnetts really thinking? Were they deceived? Were they mistaken? Or was it something else?
And the long-term impact on Natalia. How does someone even begin to process all of this?
It's overwhelming to consider. This whole deep dive, it really exposes the cracks, doesn't it? The complexities within families, the potential vulnerabilities in adoption, how easily perceptions can be shaped.
Yeah, and how the legal system sometimes struggles when faced with situations that are just so far outside the norm. The human cost is immense.
It leaves you thinking, what does it really mean to know someone's story? Especially when the narrative itself is so fiercely contested and maybe even manipulated. How much can we ever truly know? That's definitely something to ponder long after we finish talking about it.